is one of the biggest voices that matter as far as policy making in New Delhi is concerned. He's championed many things that have finally found their way into big policies here in India. None other than the vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, and many people call him the eyes and ears of his boss, the Prime Minister himself. It's a pleasure indeed to have Dr. Arvind Panagariya join us right here on ET Now. It's indeed a pleasure to have you. I'm going to ask you the more uncomfortable question first. It's almost been 3 years since the Modi government came in. The bad loan mess or the NPA menace was perhaps the biggest elephant in the room. What took the government so long to tackle this?
See, this is a problem which has never been solved early. So whether if it's the problem of toxic assets in the United States or in similar problems that are faced in some of the other countries, all analysts will tell you that, you know, for every country that this is one problem. Nobody looks back and says that, gee, we did it in a haste or we did it too early. So there is a difficult problem, and some earlier steps were taken under Indradhanush, but they turned out not to be fully adequate. But I think now we are really doing what we needed to do.
So before I get into the specifics, considering you spoke about the word adequate, are these measures going to be adequate enough to resolve the 6 lakh crore worth of bad loans that sit on the books of some of India's largest lenders?
So I think this is a huge beginning. This is a huge beginning. This may not be the ultimate end of the, or this may not be the end game. But let us see, you know, where this leads us in the next 4 to 6 months, let's say, and then we can certainly reassess. But this was the big step waiting to be taken. I am very pleased the Finance Minister has moved forward.
You have yourself written a lot about these bad loans, and I'll come to some of the points that you have made, and I think they're kind of finding measures and you know, space in public discourse. But the NPA menace, so to say, and when you say 4 to 6 months, are you here suggesting that the test of these measures will be in the next 4 to 6 months and the way forward will be decided after that?
No, we certainly have to see what progress we make under these measures in next 4 to 6 months, and then we reassess. So, you know, in policy there has to be constant reassessment, how a particular policy was conceived, whether it actually worked as it was conceived. If not, then what corrections you need to do. So this is the sense in which I say let's first see what we achieve in the next 4 to 6 months.
Many people had thought that the reason why NPAs are not being resolved is because these are always going to be discretionary decisions. How much haircut to take, what assets to sell, what assets to auction. In that sense, the legislative legitimacy that this ordinance, which will perhaps be law soon, gives to resolving the NPAs is a big move. How important do you believe legislative legitimacy is to resolving the NPA mess?
You see, I mean, because of a lot of the other legislations and multiple vigilance agencies that we have, there is huge reluctance on the part of every actor to move, you know, right, whether it be the finance ministry or the banks. But now I think, you know, with the legislative backing, which gives at least, draws some firewalls and all around the various actors, I think now the ability of these actors to move is greatly enhanced.
So in some sense, there is perhaps parliamentary backing to resolve the NPAs. They are almost being ring-fenced in many ways. There is a counter argument to this, and let me just as a journalist be skeptic and put forward the counter argument. The counter argument is that while it's comforting for the banks to know that the RBI can invoke insolvency and bankruptcy clauses and all of that, should the RBI at all do this? Shouldn't this be a commercial decision to be taken by the banks? I'm going to give a caveat there. Yes, banks are not taking that decision.
Right. I think, you know, your caveat is where the answer lies. You know that, and often, no, remember, any legislation you bring in, it has often two sides.
That's right.
And therefore, how it is implemented becomes very important also. But, you know, the RBI for decades has been a very responsible body, and so therefore, you know, I expect the RBI to use the powers given to it very rationally and in the interest of the country. So I am not particularly worried on that count, and in fact I am pleased because I think in the end this was needed for forward movement to take place.
So you don't believe that the RBI or the special directives that the RBI can now issue given the new ordinance will infringe upon the commercial autonomy of India's banks?
Well, I think we have had a logjam, and in some ways really, you know, it facilitates the banks which felt that they really couldn't act on their own for the fear of various vigilance agencies and so forth. So I think, on the whole, given the problem we face, ultimately, policy making is also a bit of an art, not pure science. And given the problems we face, I think this is really the right way to go.
So you don't believe that this is yet another discretionary layer added? I mean, let's address the elephant in the room as it is, and the elephant in the room is that these are discretionary decisions. The promoters and bankers have not been able to arrive at a consensus, because bankers do believe they can be hauled up for this decision, and which is why changes in the Corruption Act will be very important to facilitate that. But given the legislative legitimacy that comes with it, do you believe another layer of discretion is added, because it's the RBI now that will take a call on where to issue special directives, where to issue special instructions, where to invoke insolvency?
Right. So let me step back a little bit. You
Yes.
mentioned about the commercial bank, decision being a commercial one, and
That's
the
right.
banks.
Yes.
So as long as the banks actually take the necessary decisions on their own, there is no issue. I think, directive will not have to be issued. So the RBI will really step in only in cases where actually the even based on commercial considerations, a decision by the commercial bank is not being made. So I think this is a facilitating move, and I do believe that RBI is an incredibly robust and responsible body. As institutions go, it is one of the oldest ones, and so I really think that this is for the better.
So this is not micromanaging professionally run boards of banks?
No, this is unfortunately. I mean, if we could undo some of the other constraints which have prevented the action from being taken by the commercial banks themselves, then of course, this will not be required. But given that these other restrictions are there, and given that the banks have not been able to act for the 3 years, I think I won't think of this as micromanagement. And certainly the government has the possibility of revoking that power eventually once the cleanup has actually happened. So it is not necessary that these powers are left forever with the RBI.
One part of this whole debate, which is also sometimes percolating in popular imagination, is that a person like Vijay Mallya has become the face of defaulters in this country. There's a lot of effort being put in to extradite him and all of that. Now, while that effort is warranted and perhaps is good, because there is taxpayers' money that's involved, in recapitalizing public sector banks, and there is big default, what about the others? Because he is not the biggest defaulter in the country. There are many others who owe a lot of money to public sector banks. They go unnoticed and under the radar, perhaps because they don't have that kind of a lifestyle that catches that kind of an imagination. So what about the others?
No, but look, wherever laws have been violated, punishment will be meted out. So, somehow thinking that we are treating those, treating those who genuinely for a wrong call versus those who willfully actually took a wrong call to make a quick buck, the same. But that's not it. I think resolution has to proceed under a single set of rules. But wherever anybody is discovered as having actually violated laws to make a fast buck, they will be brought to book. So just as Vijay Mallya is being pursued, this is going to happen in other cases as well.
I'm going to move to the other big elephant in the room, and not so much from the economy point of view, but from the Niti Aayog point of view. And I'm presuming this must have been personally devastating to be told by a right-wing Sangh Parivar ideologue to say that the Niti Aayog is colluding with Big Pharma to sabotage the drug price control regime. What is your defense? Because they believe that drug price makers or drug makers perhaps are making profits anywhere between 500% to 4,000%, and you were throwing your weight behind them instead of throwing your weight with the Indian policy makers.
So look, we as a body, which is a think tank, we simply go what is in the national interest. That's what we go by, and that's what we try to advise in any way when our advice is sought by the PMO. We certainly don't serve anybody's interest, any individual entity or individual person's interest. And in this case, actually, we have simply written that a medicine being put on the Essential Commodities Act list should not automatically become subject to price regulation. I see perfectly good analytic arguments for that, that a commodity that is essential ought to be available to everybody at a reasonable price. But it is not automatic that therefore price control is an essential element of supplying this. You know, if the price of the of that particular medicine is fixed too low, I mean, this is an area in which the quality of the medicine can vary enormously, and if you through a very low price ceiling lead to the exit of the best quality suppliers, then it is the patient who can suffer.
Right.
So that is all. We have just said that, look, you know, it shouldn't become automatic. You should do the analysis. So the decision on price control ought to be separate from the decision to put a commodity in the essential commodity. That's all.
How would you argue against the point that this Swadeshi lobby seems to be making against profits of these companies? They believe it's anywhere between 500 to 4,000%. And again, you know, this brings to the whole argument, the ideological debate. Is profit a bad word? Is there too much profit being made on these drugs, which end up saving human lives?
Yeah, look, you know, pharmaceuticals around the world has been a difficult area, and so I'm not very surprised actually, because, you know, often, particularly when new medicines are being discovered, the pharmaceutical industry's position is that, look, you know, we try several, you know, after trying hundreds of medicines, one might really click. So when you look only at the manufacturing cost of the medicine and the price at which you sell, the profit looks high. But the cost actually has to include also the cost of research.
I understand, yes.
Now, is that a fully valid argument? I do not know. That's the argument pharmaceutical industry makes. But at the same time, I sort of completely, I'm completely with many of the consumer goods advocates that, look, you know, not having the option to control the price, to introduce price controls, can also lead to very astronomical prices, yes, because which may in fact be out of line with even the research costs.
That's right.
Because, yeah, you know, here you got a patent, right? This is particularly true of the patented drugs, that once you got the patent, you are the sole producer.
That's right.
And so you could,
and you can have absolute monopoly on that.
And you have the absolute monopoly, in fact.
But sir, the you know, the factual debate set aside, if I were to just ask you from an ideological point of view, I mean, you, now it's you. Earlier it was the RBI governor being attacked by these right wingers. Don't you expect the government to take a stance? Don't you expect the government to come to the Niti Aayog's defense? Or is it, or have you made your peace with the fact that people will just come, throw stones at any think tank, at anybody who wants to have an opinion in this government or as an arm of this government? I mean, shouldn't the government of India be standing by Niti Aayog or taking a stance on this?
No, look, after all, we are also the government of India, and we are perfectly capable of defending ourselves.
No, by government of India, I really mean the Prime Minister's office or the Prime Minister or you know, senior ministers.
No, on these small matters, I personally don't think. This is a particular criticism made of the Niti Aayog, where we can give a clarification, and you have thankfully provided me the opportunity to do so. This really, I think, is not to the level where we should really be seeking the Prime Minister's intervention.
At some sense, have policy makers in New Delhi made their peace with the fact that they may be attacked time and again by the Swadeshi lobbies, by the right wingers, for being too westernized, for being colluding with the West? I mean, there is this sense of, have you made your peace with it then?
No, I think, you know, I mean, look, after all, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and RSS are a part of the BJP government.
That's right, yes.
And so, you know, but this differences exist, and just as differences existed under the UPA, right, you know, yes, the National Advisory Council had a view, the Planning Commission at that time had a different view, the government may have had a different view. So these differences remain, and it's a healthy thing in a way, you know. I mean, I see no harm at all. Actually, it's a healthy thing. That's that criticisms happen both from the left and from the right. You know, that keeps us in check, that keeps us on our toes, and we think harder.
So I'm going to talk about the other argument that, I mean, other public discourse that the Niti Aayog seems to have started, I don't know if it's knowingly or unknowingly, which is to tax agricultural incomes. For the record, is this a view of just private member Bibek Debroy? Is this a view of the Niti Aayog? Is this consciously done to start a public debate on it, or or was this just an observation made in passing and you know,
so let
with
me
not
be
so
very
much of consequences?
very categorical on this, because this has come time and again that
That's
somehow the Niti Aayog wanted to start something, you know, light a fire or something, and so we just conspired to put out this view and got Mr. Vivek Devroy to articulate this view.
Yes.
That simply isn't the case. I think, you know, there was some sense on the part of somebody in the press conference to ask this question, that, you know, and that I think Business Standard had also put out something that morning or the morning before, that somehow there was this issue going around. But this was never there in our action document, and certainly, you know, on agriculture anyway, Dr. Ramesh Chand largely is in charge of what we do. I almost always defer to his judgment on most of the issues on agriculture. I mean, I sort of try to learn from him, as well as others. But let me be completely categorical. You know, this is not the view of the Niti Aayog. This is not in our action agenda, and this is not going to be a proposal made in our 15-year vision, and in view of the fact that a debate has already happened, you know.
It's too political a hot potato for for it to find a mention in the 15-year roadmap. But you also wear a very, very eminent economist hat. What does your economic understanding tell you? Is there an economic case to tax the rich farmers? I mean, the politics set aside.
Yeah, no. I mean, look, you know, you tell me to wear the economist's hat, but unfortunately, you never wear that hat
when you're in the government.
When you're in the government. You know, at a practical level, what does it achieve? Really, not at this stage anyway. It doesn't achieve very much. Where we actually felt something that we included in the action agenda, where we said that, you know, there are people who camouflage vast amounts of black income as agricultural income, and then turn it into white. So that we said that, look, you know, any loopholes that can be closed to stop that practice, that ought to be done. And I think that is the only place where this issue actually comes in. And maybe somebody just, you know, saw the word agriculture and tax together and
Can I ask you for a candid confession on national television? Would your answer be very different if you weren't the vice chairman of Niti Aayog on taxing farmers?
Well, I have no idea, you know. So
well, you are the vice chairman.
That's a hypothetical question. That's a hypothetical question. You know, I could be political.
And perhaps politically
I could be political and deny it. Says no, it will be the same. I don't know.
Joblessness. It's a problem that the world is facing, particularly in India. Growth without job creation has happened for a decade now. That is still a big red in this government's report card. 3 years into existence, your big plaque, I mean, at least Mr. Modi's plaque was job creation, it hasn't happened. What will entail Indian industry to begin creating jobs?
First, let me clarify this. You know, I mean, this view seems to have, you know, been put out and as acquired currency that this growth is jobless. Frankly, there are no clear, reliable data to arrive at one or the other way. You know, and so whether the incrementally jobs have been created or not, that question, you know, we don't actually know the real answer to that question. Now, but leave out incrementally, but overall, yes, this has been a long-standing problem in India, that we have not created the organized sector, formal sector jobs. I have continuously argued that, look, you know, unemployment is less of India's problem, it's underemployment.
That's right.
Low productivity jobs, that is our problem. And that is where we need to work. First, so on the numbers issue, we need to institute better surveys, and I think that work is in progress at the MOSPI. But at the same time, I think, you know, we to some degree shot ourselves in the foot. You know, you remember we had this small scale industries reservation.
That's right, yes.
And so everywhere, you know, clothing, footwear, light manufacturing, any of these industries where lots of jobs can be created for small amount of capital investment, we put it on small scale industries reservation. Well, such small enterprises simply will not operate in the world markets. Yes. They will not capture the world markets. The result of which is that China today is exporting $175 billion worth of clothing. We are doing about 17 billion, 1/10 of China, and we do less than Bangladesh, less than Vietnam. I think the lot of this is in our history. We really adopted completely the wrong policies.
Very, very conservative, perhaps.
Well, we thought that that's where employment was. Well, we forgot that employment and output are not constrained by the domestic economy. There is a whole global economy. We never thought of going to the global economy.
So how does that equation change in our favor then?
Well, so now we are going to the global economy. We are an open economy,
and you believe that's going to help it.
And that, well, certainly look, I mean, during our fast growth period from 2003-4 to 11-12, we actually expanded our exports quite dramatically. 2002, $50 billion merchandise exports. 2011, only 9 years later, it was 300 billion.
That's right.
Sixfold. So we managed to, with fast growth, we managed to actually expand our exports. Now, a figure of sixfold. Think of it, if in another 9 years we can make the 300 into 6 times, 1,800 billion, which is 1.8 trillion. Now, that will be a huge, huge shift. That will be much, yeah.
While we were talking about exports, sir, what role do you believe the exchange rate or the level of the rupee can play in keeping India competitive as an export market? I mean, there is a lot of focus. Exports continues to be a big pie of our growth trajectory. What role can the exchange rate play? And I'm going to ask you the uncomfortable question, hoping for an answer. Is the rupee too strong for comfort right now?
Well, I'll divide the answer in 2 parts to your 2 questions. The first, does exchange rate matter for exports? Of course, it matters for the exchange rate. And if you go into the history of, when we started liberalizing our trade in 1991,
that's right.
We undertook actually 2 back-to-back devaluations, and so there was a total of very substantial, I forget how many percent, but it was a very substantial devaluation. And then we over time at different in a phased manner, we allowed the nominally at least the rupee to depreciate, although in real terms there has been a history when it for a considerable period in real terms it still appreciates because our inflation moves faster than the inflation of our competitors.
Right.
But does the exchange rate matter? Yes, of course it matters. I think it's very important. Is today rupee in nominal terms overvalued? That was your second question.
Right.
Now here we are between 2 different forces. One is the trade interest. The other, of course, is that macroeconomic stability issue. An exchange rate really is the instrument to determine the current account deficit. Now, if you look at the current account deficit side of this equation, that is roughly where we would want it to be. So, between 1 and 2% current account deficit, that's where we roughly are currently. So by that measure, you would say that the exchange rate is exchange rate is where roughly where it ought to be.
How does one do the fine balance? I know you're not going to give me, and you are not giving me a very candid answer on the strength of the rupee, but how does one balance the 2 completely contrarian forces, the import versus the export lobby as far as the exchange rate is concerned, the value of the rupee is concerned?
See, the interests of those who produce, right? We are talking producer interest here.
Yes.
So interests of the import competing products and those of the exportable products.
That's right.
Those are aligned, meaning that if rupee gets weaker, then that makes exports more lucrative for those who are exporting. And it also makes, when rupee gets weaker, then the price of imports that are coming into the country rises.
That's right. Yes.
And that also helps the producers of the import competing goods. So generally, this is where the exchange rate helps the producers of goods versus non-traded, traded goods versus non-traded. So that non-traded goods become at a disadvantage when the rupee loses ground or rupee is devalued. So that's one side of it, right? The other one has to do the current account.
Exactly, you spoke
about the current account.
We in India consider you a global insider of sorts because you don't just have the insight within India, you also bring a global perspective. And so my last question has to be about these protectionist trends or this wave of protectionism that the world is seeing, whether it's Australia or New Zealand putting curbs on immigrations, or whether it's Donald Trump talking the way he is, or UK, Brexit finally being a reality. A, how does India cope up with all of this? And because this is obviously deglobalization of sorts, and B, our policymakers very often say we'll take it up at multilateral forums like the WTO, but do we have enough muscle to push through our point of view?
So one, There are 2 points here. One is that, look, you know, it may each time this kind of protectionist deglobalization backlash appears, we think something very new is happening. There is some new element in this process, but it's not totally a new thing. So there is a little difference this time, that typically what has happened is that, you know, this protectionist sentiment is expressed by presidential candidates in all the presidential debates, but eventually whoever becomes the president comes to own the system as it exists. And so they own multilateralism, they own their free trade agreements and all. This time, when Mr. Trump actually came to the White House, certainly immediately after, there was a bit of a surprise that he said that, well,
he decided to walk the talk on his poll promises.
He decided to actually walk the talk, and including on the trade policy, and so he actually cancelled the TPP, which the predecessor had negotiated.
Yes.
So there is a you know, different slant to the events this time, but on the other hand, I think, you know, with the passage of time, I see, at least, you know, that's how it looks to me right now, that protectionist rhetoric, I think, has begun to subside a little, and perhaps, you know, we will see some shift happening, you know, but so that's my first part.
Just as a counter argument from the Indian industry, and people like Sunil Mittal have said this, that the Indian government should reciprocate by putting curbs on foreign internet companies that operate here. Do you see that being a possibility at all?
Well, look, you know, you got to see this in the context of what the WTO rules are, right? So far it seems to me now he's reacting perhaps to the H-1B visas.
That's right. Yes.
Right. You know, so what Mr. Trump has done, what President Trump has done, one needs to first assess whether that is WTO incompatible. Has that step taken or proposed, actually it's probably not yet taken, but proposed, will that actually violate our WTO rights under the obligations that the United States has undertaken as a part of the Uruguay Round Agreement? On H-1B visa, they had said 65,000 visas. Yes. So they have not closed the 65,000 visas yet. What they have said, well, will impose some minimum salary that has to be given to these people and all. That could lead to the numbers actually declining below 65,000, in which case violation would have happened. I mean, that would be very clear. Perhaps. But even without 65,000 numbers being violated, maybe there is a violation. So I don't know that, but that's what we need to see. If there is a violation, then India will be certainly perfectly on firm ground to take a retaliatory action. In fact, if we prove that at the WTO, then the appellate body or the panel would itself actually authorize the government of India to take an equivalent retaliatory action.
For the betterment of the global trade, we hope we never arrive to that situation. But on that note, Dr. Panagariya, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you very much.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/etnow.